The patterns are accelerating. If you're feeling it, if you sense that something fundamental is shifting in the fabric of reality itself, you're not imagining it. Ancient texts from civilizations separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years all point to the same window of time. 2025 to 2027, 3 years that mystics, prophets, and esoteric traditions have called the Great Awakening. Not a metaphor, not wishful thinking, a documented, predicted convergence of cosmic cycles, consciousness shifts, and planetary alignments that happens once every 26,000 years. And we are in it right now. Tonight, you're going to understand why these specific years were marked in texts that predate modern religion, why the ancients encoded warnings and instructions for this exact moment, and why everything you're experiencing, the chaos, the clarity, the confusion, the sudden awakenings happening all around you, was predicted down to the year. Let's start with what the Great Awakening actually means. Because the term has been diluted, commercialized, turned into a hashtag, but in the ancient mystery schools, in the Hindu Vedas, in the Mayan cosmology, in the Hopi Prophecies, awakening meant something specific. It meant the end of one age of consciousness and the beginning of another. A shift so profound that the rules governing human perception, intuition, and spiritual access would fundamentally change. And this shift doesn't happen gradually over centuries. It happens in concentrated windows. Threshold moments when the veil between dimensions grows thin, when supernatural abilities that were dormant suddenly activate, when people who spent their entire lives asleep suddenly snap awake with no explanation. The Vedic texts call this the transition from Kali Yuga to Satya Yuga. Kali Yuga, the age of darkness, deception, materialism, and spiritual ignorance. An age where truth is hidden, where power is consolidated in the hands of the few, where humanity forgets its divine nature. The texts say Kali Yuga lasts approximately 432,000 years, but within that vast cycle, there are smaller cycles, transition periods, and we are in one now. The Vedic scholars who studied the astronomical alignments encoded in these texts point to 2025 as a critical marker, the moment when the gravitational pull of the Dark Age begins to release, when the frequencies that kept humanity locked in lower consciousness start to shift. And here's what makes this so precise. The Vedas don't just describe this philosophically, they tie it to astronomy, to the precession of the equinoxes, to the movement of our solar system through the galactic plane. And when you calculate those cycles, when you track the wobble of Earth's axis and the position of our sun relative to the galactic center, 2025 marks a point of alignment, a moment when Earth's orientation to the cosmos shifts into a position it hasn't occupied in 26,000 years. The ancients knew this. They tracked it. They built monuments to mark it, and they left warnings. Now let's talk about the Mayan calendar. Because everyone remembers 2012, the supposed end of the world that didn't happen, and when nothing dramatic occurred, people dismissed the entire Mayan prophecy as nonsense. But that's not what the Mayans actually said. They never predicted the end of the world in 2012. They predicted the end of a cycle, the end of the fourth world and the beginning of the fifth. And they were explicit that the transition wouldn't be instant. It would unfold over a window of years, a threshold period of chaos, collapse, and rebirth. And the peak of that transition, 2025 to 2027. The Mayan long county calendar tracks cycles of approximately 5,125 years. December 21, 2012, marked the end of one of those cycles. But the Mayan priests taught that the real transformation happens in the years following the calendar reset. They described it as a period when the old structures, the old consciousness, the old systems of control would become visible for what they are, when people would see through the illusions that governed them, when the frequency of the planet itself would rise, and those who couldn't match that frequency would experience breakdowns, madness, desperation, while those who could match it would experience rapid awakenings, sudden clarity, and access to abilities they didn't know they had. The Hopi Prophecies describe the same window. They speak of the transition from the fourth world to the fifth world, and they give signs, 9 signs that mark the approach of the purification period. The first 8 have already occurred: the arrival of white men, the spinning wheels of settlers' wagons, the barbed wire fencing of the land, the iron horses, the railroads, the giant spider webs, the power lines, the stone rivers, the highways, the sea turning black, the oil spills, and the 8th sign, the hippies, The young people wearing their hair long and adopting indigenous ways, all of these have come to pass. The ninth sign is described as a dwelling place in the heavens that falls to earth with a great crash, bringing destruction and the beginning of the final purification. Some interpret this as a space station, others as a meteor, others still as a symbolic collapse of the systems that kept humanity bound. But what every Hopi elder agrees on is that once the ninth sign manifests, the transition accelerates, and the transition period they describe aligns almost perfectly with the years 2025 to 2027, 3 years of purification, 3 years when everything false is burned away, 3 years when those who are awake must hold the frequency for those still waking. But first, you must understand why these texts all converge on the same time frame. It's not coincidence. It's not vague prophecy that can be retrofitted to any era. These are mathematical, astronomical, and cyclical calculations that required advanced knowledge of celestial mechanics. The ancients were tracking something real, something measurable, and that something is the movement of our entire solar system through what's called the Photon belt, a band of high-frequency energy our solar system passes through once every 26,000 years as it orbits the galactic center. Modern astrophysics has confirmed that our solar system does indeed orbit the center of the Milky Way galaxy, completing one full revolution approximately every 225 to 250 million years. But within that larger orbit, there are smaller cycles. Our solar system oscillates above and below the galactic plane, crossing through the densest part of the galactic equator in regular intervals. And ancient astronomers tracked this. They understood that when our solar system passes through certain regions of the galaxy, the electromagnetic frequencies affecting Earth change, and those frequency changes affect consciousness. This isn't mysticism. This is science the ancients encoded in myth because they had no other language for it. When Earth's magnetic field interacts with different galactic frequencies, the Schumann resonance changes. The Schumann resonance is the electromagnetic frequency of Earth's ionosphere, often called the heartbeat of the planet. For thousands of years, it held steady at approximately 7.83 Hz, but in recent decades it's been spiking, reaching frequencies of 16 Hz, 30 Hz, even higher during certain periods. And neuroscience has shown that when the Schumann resonance rises, human brainwave patterns shift. The brain becomes more capable of theta and gamma states, states associated with deep meditation, intuitive knowing, and transcendent experience. The ancients knew this would happen during the transition years. They knew that as our solar system moved into this new position, as the frequencies bombarding Earth increased, human consciousness would be forced to evolve. Those who resisted, who clung to lower frequency states of fear, anger, and materialism, would experience the shift as traumatic, as disorienting, as a breakdown of everything they thought was real. But those who surrendered, who allowed the transformation, who raised their own frequency to match the incoming energies, would experience it as awakening, as sudden downloads of knowledge, as activation of dormant DNA, as the lifting of a veil they didn't even know was there. And this is exactly what's happening right now. Look around. The number of people reporting spontaneous spiritual experiences is exploding. People who never meditated, never studied spirituality, suddenly having visions, hearing guidance, experiencing synchronicities so frequent and precise they can no longer be dismissed as coincidence. People waking up at 333-444, 11 men 11 every single night. People feeling called to completely change their lives with no logical reason. People suddenly unable to tolerate jobs, relationships, and environments that they functioned in perfectly well for years. This is the frequency shift. The Great Awakening isn't something that's coming. It's already here. 2025 is the acceleration point, the year when the frequency reaches a level that can no longer be ignored, when the gap between those who are awake and those who are still asleep becomes so wide that they're essentially living in different realities. And 2027 marks the stabilization, the point when the new frequency locks in, when the dust settles, when the new Earth and the old Earth have fully separated into different timelines, different densities, different dimensions of experience. The Book of Revelation describes this as the separation of the wheat from the chaff, the sheep from the goats, not as punishment, as a natural sorting that happens when frequency divides reality. Those operating at higher consciousness literally cannot occupy the same experiential dimension as those operating at lower consciousness. And during these 3 years, 2025 to 2027, That separation becomes visible, tangible, undeniable. Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, described this period in readings he gave in the 1930s and 40s. He spoke of Earth changes, pole shifts, and the return of records from Atlantis that would be discovered and would change humanity's understanding of its own history. He dated these events to the period between 2025 and 2028. He said that during this window, the souls who had incarnated specifically to assist with the transition would activate, that they would remember why they came, that they would step into their roles as way showers, grid workers, and anchors of the new frequency. If you're hearing this, if something in you is responding to these words, there's a strong probability you're one of those souls. You incarnated for this. You volunteered. Before you were born, you knew this window was coming. You knew it would be chaotic. You knew the old structures would fight to maintain control. You knew many would be lost to fear and confusion, and you came anyway, because you also knew that your presence, your frequency, your ability to remain anchored in truth while everything around you shakes, would make the difference. The Hopi elders say, "We are the ones we've been waiting for." Not a savior descending from the clouds, not a political leader, not an external rescue. Us, the ones who chose to be here now, the ones who are waking up, the ones who are starting to remember, the ones who are feeling the call to step out of the systems that no longer serve, to speak truth that isn't popular, to live from the heart when the world is screaming at you to live from fear. Now here's what you need to understand about these 3 years. They are not going to be comfortable. The old systems will collapse. Financial systems, political systems, religious systems, medical systems, educational systems. Everything built on lies, control, and separation will be exposed and will fall. And that process is terrifying for those who've placed their identity and security in those systems. But for those who understand what's happening, for those who know this is the purification the prophecies described, it's not the end, it's the birth. And birth is violent. Birth is messy. Birth is painful. But what emerges on the other side is new life. The ancient texts all describe what comes after the purification. The Satya Yuga, the fifth world, the new earth. The age of Aquarius, different names for the same reality. An age when humanity lives in alignment with natural law, when technology serves spirit instead of replacing it, when power is distributed instead of hoarded, when truth is valued over comfort, when connection is prioritized over control. But that world doesn't manifest automatically. It manifests through the choices of individuals during the transition. Every time you choose truth over convenience, you're building the new world. Every time you choose love over fear, you're anchoring the higher frequency. Every time you refuse to participate in systems of deception, you're withdrawing energy from the old paradigm and feeding it to the new. The ancient mystery schools taught that during transition periods like this, the initiates had one job: hold the frequency. Don't get pulled into the chaos. Don't let the fear consume you. Don't react from lower consciousness, even when everything around you is screaming at you to do so. Stand firm in what you know to be true. Remain anchored in love, even when you're surrounded by hate. Trust the process even when it looks like everything is falling apart, because here's the secret the texts all encode. The Great Awakening isn't happening to you. It's happening through you. You are not a passive observer of this shift. You are an active participant, a co-creator. And the quality of your consciousness during these 3 years will directly influence the outcome, not just for you, for the collective, because consciousness is entangled. When you raise your frequency, you create a ripple. You make it easier for others to raise theirs. When you anchor in truth, you create a stability field that others can attune to when their world is shaking. The texts also warn of interference during this period, forces that don't want humanity to awaken, that benefit from fear, division, and control. The Gnostic texts call them archons, the Vedas call them asuras, the biblical texts call them principalities and powers. Different names for the same phenomenon. Entities or systems that feed on low-frequency human emotion and will do everything possible to keep humanity locked in fear, anger, and separation during the transition. And their strategy is predictable: create chaos, amplify division, distort truth, flood the information space with confusion so people don't know what to believe, offer false awakenings that lead to spiritual pride instead of genuine humility, promise shortcuts and secret knowledge that bypass the actual inner work required. and most dangerously, convince people that they're awake when they're still asleep, just dreaming a different dream. This is why discernment is the most critical skill for these 3 years, not the judgmental kind, the kind that feels truth in your body, the kind that recognizes resonance, the kind that knows the difference between information that empowers and information that creates dependency, the kind that can spot a false prophet not by what they say, but by the fruit they produce in the people who follow them. And here's the practice the ancients gave for navigating this period: stillness. In the middle of the chaos, find the eye of the storm within yourself, that place that doesn't react, that doesn't panic, that watches everything with calm awareness. The texts all describe this as the secret weapon, because the chaos is designed to pull you out of center, to make you reactive, to get you operating from fear instead of presence. And the moment you react from fear, you drop in frequency. You become part of the problem instead of part of the solution. But when you remain still, when you observe without judgment, when you respond instead of react, you hold a frequency that becomes a lighthouse for others. They might not consciously understand why, but they'll feel safer around you. Calmer, more grounded, and in that safety, they'll have space to wake up, to question, to remember. The years 2025 to 2027 are the eye of the needle the biblical texts spoke about. The narrow gate. Not everyone will pass through. Not because they're being judged or punished, but because they're not ready. Because their consciousness is too identified with the old paradigm, too attached to systems that are collapsing, too afraid to let go of certainty and step into trust. And that's okay. This isn't the only cycle. This isn't the only opportunity. Souls incarnate over and over, learning, growing, evolving at their own pace. But for those who are ready, for those who came here specifically for this transition, these 3 years are why you were born. This is your mission, your purpose, your soul contract, and everything you've experienced in your life up until now has been preparation. Every hardship taught you resilience. Every loss taught you non-attachment. Every betrayal taught you discernment. Every dark night of the soul taught you that you can survive the dissolution of identity and emerge more whole on the other side. You are built for this. The ancient texts predicted you. The prophecies described you. The elders said you would come. The 144,000, the rainbow warriors, the lightworkers, the star seeds. Different traditions, different names, same essential meaning. The souls who volunteered to incarnate during the transition to hold the frequency, to anchor the light, to remember what most have forgotten, and to help others remember too. In the coming months, you're going to notice the acceleration intensifying. Things that used to take years will happen in weeks. Things that used to take weeks will happen in days. Time itself is compressing as frequency rises. You'll notice people around you either waking up rapidly or descending deeper into fear and confusion. You'll notice that neutrality becomes impossible, that you're being forced to choose, not between political parties or ideologies, between frequency levels, between love and fear, between truth and comfort, between the old world and the new. And every choice you make carries weight now, because these are the years when trajectories are set, when timelines split, when the frequency you hold determines which version of Earth you experience on the other side of 2027. The prophecies say there will be 2 Earths, not physically separate planets, but different dimensional experiences of the same planet. Those holding higher frequency will experience the new Earth. Abundance, community, connection, truth, freedom. Those holding lower frequency will experience the continuation of the old Earth. Scarcity, division, control, deception, bondage. And both will be convinced their version is the only reality. Both will have evidence to support their worldview, because reality itself is splitting along frequency lines. This is what the ancient texts meant when they spoke of the separation. The harvest, the sorting. It's not judgment from an external God. It's the natural physics of consciousness organizing itself by resonance. So the question isn't whether the Great Awakening is real. The ancient texts predicted it. The cycles confirm it. The frequencies prove it. The mass awakenings happening globally demonstrate it. The question is what role you're going to play in it: observer or participant, victim or creator, asleep or awake. Those who understand what these 3 years represent walk differently. They stopped waiting for permission. They stopped seeking validation. They stopped trying to convince the sleeping. They simply embody the frequency of the world they want to live in. And by doing so, they become the bridge, the portal, the doorway through which others can pass when they're ready. The Great Awakening isn't coming. It's here. You're in it. Right now. And every choice you make, every thought you think, every word you speak, every action you take is either feeding the old paradigm or birthing the new. The ancient ones knew you would read these words. They encoded the knowledge so you would find it at exactly the right moment. And that moment is now. If you recognize yourself in this message, if you feel the truth of it reverberating in your bones, leave a comment with the words, "I am awake." Not as a claim of superiority, as a simple statement of fact, as a signal to others who are waking, as a commitment to hold the frequency no matter what chaos unfolds around you. And if you want to prepare to understand the practices and principles that will stabilize you through these transition years, subscribe, because what comes next will give you the tools the initiates used, the meditations, the techniques, the inner technologies that transform crisis into initiation. The prophecies were written for you. The silver moon illuminated the calm lake surface. The silver moon illuminated the calm lake surface, their shadows gently along the shoreline. But the proof,